Really excited for today's show on Strength Chat. So we've got Brad Cox here with us. I'll do a little formal intro in a few. First, I want to talk about something that we've got going on. I'm wearing my Grand Goals shirt. Obviously, our audio listeners can't see that, but this is the new Grand Goals. So I've been talking a bit about my squat coming up, but the fundraiser this time that we're promoting is for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And so for those that don't know, my partner here, Rudy, his grandson has worked his way through that recently, and he's got a goal. This is Connor, of raising $50,000 for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and we're supporting that. And that's what 100% of the proceeds from the Grand Goals shirts are going towards that society. And so please join us in helping support the cause. And this will be ongoing for a while. So anything you want to add, Rudy?
Well, Connor was stricken with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at age 14 and then battled through the chemo and radiation, and it's one of those things you say, a 14-year-old, why him and not me? It's like, but he's battled through it. I mean, had great care here in Oregon, and he's been announced as cancer-free. He's back lifting weights and into football now, so we're very excited that he's recovered. And my son Andy, Connor's dad, has set this goal, and we're happy to be part of it. And I appreciate you, Chris, dedicating this big event that you're going to do a month from now, and helping us raise money for leukemia and lymphoma. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, like I said, today we've got Brad Cox on the show. Brad was, I think, our third guest that we've ever had on the podcast, and so
which
it's been
feels like yesterday,
like 4 years ago-ish now.
Yeah.
But Brad is co-founder of Acumobility. Any Kabuki followers should be aware of the brand. If not, you should go check it out. Acumobility makes some phenomenal soft tissue treatment tools and a lot of education surrounding it. And we've actually, Brad and I have partnered on a number of video series and some techniques that we've come up with.
I remember that early on. You
From
even
inception.
named it. Yeah. The Vice method. It was founded right here with you,
Right
two.
here.
Literally.
Yeah, we had some problem people, and Brad and I were sitting there troubleshooting. We were doing some case studies, working through some issues, and we grabbed both our tools, and just it came about from that, which is really cool.
Combine the two.
Now, that brings up some thoughts, though, and issues that I see in the industry. So,
it does.
Yeah, we've got a lot of different tools out there, and we make some tools as well. Like I said, they work really well in combination with the Acumobility products. And there's a lot of different approaches to using the tools. So they can be used for enhancing performance by shortening recovery time frames, dealing with restrictions, we'll say, gaining range of motion, movement preparation, getting things ready to go. But online you see all these a lot of topics and discussions that people are arguing about. Don't you see the same thing, Brad?
I think it's rampant, and nobody's talking about the same problem though. And that's, I think, something that needs to be addressed, is that people are talking past each other, claiming, this isn't good for that, or you have to do this, but nobody's defining the goal. And that's kind of what we realize, is that you have to work backwards. You have to go, what am I trying to achieve, before you start defining what technique you should be doing, when you should be doing it, how you should be doing it. And right now it's very vague, right? So we see people just haphazardly rolling around, or arguing about rolling, or arguing about the effects of these things. But nobody's talking about the when, where, why, and how. And that, to me, is the most important part of the conversation, right?
Because they need to be used oftentimes with a broader scope of methodology.
Oh, yeah.
Let's take, for example, the people that argue, this is a very common argument, research shows that tools don't provide any long-lasting benefit to range of motion.
That's my favorite one.
I'm not going to...
We never said they did.
I'm not going to disagree with that research at all. But it doesn't mean that they're not effective. If you have an actual broader methodology, you've got some goals. So let's say, hey, my goal is to increase range of motion. I cannot get in a position to do an overhead squat, let's say.
Right.
Well, the tool is going to provide, if you use it effectively, allow you to reach that range of motion. If you free up the restrictions, but it should be combined with actually using and training in it. And we know that using and training gets us an adaptive response, specific adaptation to impose demands, very simple concepts. And now we can actually see long-term change. So the people arguing this are just, they've got a blinders on.
Yeah, and they're working in a silo where it's just this
like
thing.
This is what this says. Well, let's open those blinders and look at an overall approach, methodology, and what are we trying to accomplish. But that isn't the only use, right? So can you give some others examples of different goals and how you would use those tools?
Well, I think building off of what you were just saying there, right, is that it's important to realize that if you're talking about, let's say, maximizing power in squat, something like that, right? Well, there's probably going to be one or two key things that, yes, to the argument that people are making that like, oh, if you use a ball there, that, let's say, tibial rotation isn't going to change long term, right? But you can't tell me that if I can change that in 5 minutes or less, allow you to fire your arch, drive through the ground, and actually maintain, proper glute activation through the whole range, that's not going to make the squat that day better. Which goes back to what you were just saying. The squat then becomes the fix.
Exactly.
That glues it all together.
The squat is the fix.
The squat is the fix. And
right.
That's the real goal. And that's what we try to emphasize is that how do we find through like really key and quick assessments, how do we find those little gems that if you dedicated literally just 5 minutes of work to, but you knew what you were attempting to improve, and then you incorporated that into better activation, better sequencing, well, then that glue of then loading that is going to be what actually causes that to change. And that's where I think we, need, as an industry, need to understand is that all of these are tools. I don't care what it is. Breathing exercise, trigger point tool, load, they're all tools.
Yeah.
Well, it's how you weave them together.
But isn't tissue isn't all tissue work just temporary? I mean, that's like to say I get a massage and I never have to have another massage again because it fixed me for it's not permanent. It's not permanent, right?
Like it's a silly argument to be making because like I don't know anybody who's making the argument that it is permanent. Like I've never seen somebody make that argument, right? Like that's
except on social media.
Except on social media, which is what goes back to this kind of like vague, overarching conversation where people aren't defining how they're using this, what they're using it for, and you have to do that.
And we also get scope creep with that. Like we both produce a ton of content, and a lot of other people do as well. And people just start doing a little of, I think I should be doing this stuff.
Right.
I think I should be doing this.
Without
I saw
context.
a great video without actually knowing why. What problem am I trying to resolve? And better yet, how can I test beforehand and test post to validate that I've actually getting a response?
Like you can't argue that. Like if I check your tibial rotation, right, and your arch fails to fire, your foot rolls, and you've got restricted tibial rotation, and it's causing you to do something funky in your squat, and then we do some active mobility work to that, and in minutes you can fire up that arch, rotate that tibia, and maintain better alignment. Well, there's no argument against that.
I check my tibial rotation every week, by the way, because it's really important when I'm squatting the heavy weights right now. Right. Like if I have any restriction in that, like people, I did some videos on this recently. I used some Acumobility products. I think you guys reposted the video because I'm getting off on a tangent here. But a lot of people always want to jump if they see a shift in a squat or something. They're jumping to
the hips.
It's glute. It's the hips.
Right.
And like let's look at the whole chain. And then let's test and validate that we've made some change. But tibial rotation can throw you in that because if I'm lacking the ability to rotate the tibia, the lower leg, then I won't be able to maintain position. That's actually going to look like maybe it caves in, but I'm actually pushing away from the restriction, which is going to push on to the other leg that may not be lacking that. And it looks like I've got a hip shift.
Exactly.
But I don't.
And you can spend a lot of time
chasing it,
chasing those hips. Shift, and I think that's where a lot of the argument comes in, is that people are doing work to the wrong area. And then they're frustrated because they're like, oh, I work the hips all the time and nothing changes. Well, guess what that tells me? you're working the wrong thing. Right, and that's what we keep seeing over and over again.
It's a common mistake you see all the time, and people have an issue in their glute, but it's somewhere downstream that's causing the problem, and they work the hell out of the glute, and nothing ever happens.
Till the cows come home.
Exactly.
Or the diaphragm, you're not using all aspects of the diaphragm, and you're not getting inflation into the oblique on the glute side. And all of a sudden,
you've got 20 other mobility problems, right?
When it's actually a stability
when
problem.
It's a stability problem. And I think that this is where we're trying to bring more and more clarity, right? And this goes back to the order of priority. This goes back to what you guys teach about it's bracing first, right? Then it's feet. Well, there's a reason for that neurologically. And so all problems are not created equal. And so applying a myofascial technique to a problem that is not the real problem, of course you're going to get inconclusive results and or useless waste of time.
I could sit there doing clamshells on an Acumobility ball all day long, and every time I squat, that glute's not going to fire, or a whole bunch of other, again, problems are going to move around. And I'm going to say, well, this isn't working.
Exactly, because you didn't look at your adductors, right? Or you didn't look at your feet, or you didn't look at that. And so that's what we're trying to do, is bring more and more clarity to the conversation of this should not be haphazard. This should not be guessing work. And it should not be, oh, I'm sore here or I feel tight here. That's where I apply this work. That's almost never, right, the cause of the dysfunction.
Now, let's talk about some other applications and uses, because we get into thinking about it only as a tool for dealing with mobility restrictions, things of that nature. I do a lot of work here and there through the week around some of this stuff, because the sooner I get on it, if I've got a little bit of tightness, and maybe I don't have necessarily limited range of motion or anything like that yet, but let's just say with the amount that I'm squatting right now, there's a fair bit of tightness and probably restriction from nearly every session.
Right.
But the movement is the healer. Like we talked about, squatting is the fix. Walking down the street is also a fix. But it's not a fix if I'm hobbling.
Exactly.
It's not a fix if I've got little orientation problems, right? But so
in fact, that'll compound the problem.
So your every
step,
your everyday life is a huge healer. If we've got those tissues around the joint allowing it to work effectively. So the sooner I get this, and this is. I'm kind of hammering on a point that I've been talking about for years,
right?
Which is waiting till the last minute to do your work, because the sooner we can actually clean or bring the tone down in that tissue, the faster I'm going to recover, because I'm going to have so much time of actually moving well.
Exactly.
I don't want to wait till overhead squat day. I don't do overhead squats, but I don't want to wait till then and go, oh, I got to work on the lat, the scap, the external rotators, the whatever we've defined as our issue from our testing that's limiting that. Actually, could be pec minor, pec, all those.
There's
a lot of
scalenes, or we don't know.
Again, and this is the point of
assessments,
the assessments. Like, you've got to actually be able to know, because just this one video that you saw or technique that you read about may not be the fix. You really do have to actually understand.
You got to go a little deeper.
Exactly.
And you got to test,
and then test,
and
then go use it.
Oh,
wow, this sounds pretty simple, actually, right?
I mean, right? And
test and
retest,
and then do something, retest. I got range. Okay, and now actually go load and move.
Oh, but that doesn't work.
Okay, yeah.
There's no proof for any of that. Like, it's just fascinating to me.
But the key is assessment, though, is it not, Brad? I mean, and how many of our listeners really have the ability to self-assess their issues, and so that they may be on social media trying to find the answers, and then they're getting answers from a non-professional too.
But there is, I mean, we produce materials on assessment. Brad does as well.
Exactly.
So it's really a matter of, we're driving people to make sure that they're paying attention to this, not just the magic trick in the video that they saw happen.
People like the sexy stuff,
right?
But they didn't go.
But they
but why? What's the why behind what we're doing it?
Yeah,
right?
They didn't look.
We're not doing it just for fun.
Right. Those other pieces of it, and that's the point I'm trying to drive home. And then if you still don't understand, go find a professional. People ask me all the time, and I'm like, well, here's a list. Go to movementproviders.com. Go to rehab, to performance.com. And go to clinical athlete. These are all lists of people that are athlete-based providers that you can try to find somebody if you don't have a good local reference. Hopefully you've got somebody at your gym that can speak to, that goes, hey, this is a PT that we work with. Like, I know, you're in Boston, and I know
We've
a lot
got
of
our
the gyms.
sports medicine clinic.
You got your sports medicine clinic, and you got a lot of local gyms that know you guys and they reference you. We do the same thing here. So go that avenue first, because again, I can't validate everybody on these lists. This is my go-to.
Yeah, this is just a starting place for
those. Yeah,
but and I think that goes to one of the other problems that we see when we talk about defining the why behind stuff. Right? Is that you can do what we're talking about first is really maximizing movement potential. And that's something that like both of our companies like really emphasize. How do we get the most out of this squat? How do we get the most out of deadlift? But then there is also oh, sorry.
No, you continue. I don't want to lose my frame of thought.
Okay,
I got something I want to cover.
But then there's different categories of this, right? Because then there's the category of I am actually injured. Well, guess what? That is a different set of work. And yes, it still follows orders of priority. It follows rules, but you can't say that the same amount of work that you would have to do to just prep a better lunge pattern is the same amount of work you'd have to do to rehab an ACL injury, right? They're different, and they have to be treated differently. Even if it's the same technique, the why changes. And I think this goes to the deeper thing of people not defining when they're talking about all the different possible techniques that they can pull out, why? Because then there's also just recovery. Just pure movement quality, right? Like, end of the day, and we're going to put out a ton of education for this coming up, right? Which is the idea of like whole body work. That's actually not just specific, not based off of assessment. That's almost like a standalone level work. Well, that has a whole other intention behind it, and it's super valid. It's just a different thing. And I think that's where people get confused. Is they're applying one, maybe just like passive rolling recovery techniques, to then being their active prep work wrongly. Yeah. And it's like, no, that's not your active prep work. Your active prep work should be incorporating tensioning and release, actively pursuing the movement quality with a number of things that have to happen, right? When we teach any of our release techniques, we are incorporating a sequence that involves active tension and release through a range of motion to not just improve range of motion. That's actually not even our goal half the time. It is to improve your ability to activate through that range. Yeah. Right? That's the end goal, because we're about to load that thing. Yep. That's a totally different goal than if I'm just stretching something. Yeah.
If I want to stretch and feel good and relax, like that's
super valid.
That's
just
fine.
A different thing.
But you're not going to do that before you train.
Exactly.
And some people get confused there. Right. I use the same tools, and a lot of the work looks very similar, but it's
the intention.
The intent behind it is different, and it's much faster and very short.
Which is something that I think is really important.
So we'll just stick.
You're talking about movement prep now. That's short. Yeah.
Movement prep is short,
prep, but using tissue, like we're still talking tissue tools,
right?
But I was going to reference other movement prep, which is a lot of times we call it corrective exercise. We like to call it, skill acquisition type stuff, but basically what is commonly known as correctives. Like if we're doing that from a developmental standpoint, it might be going out and spending, doing like 4 sets of 10 for bird dogs on an off day.
Sure.
Or dead bugs.
Right.
On day, it's really intentful and maybe just like 3 or 4. Like
but the
really
intensity
good. Exactly.
Is up. Right. Volume down. Intensity up.
Exactly.
Same with the release techniques.
Get it firing.
We're working tib anterior, 3 to 5 reps, moving on. We're not hanging out all day doing that work, because I'm trying to get an input into the nervous system. And then I'm trying to move on from that and incorporate it.
And we're trying to move the input towards the sympathetic side of the nervous system versus like the parasympathetic side.
That's a different goal.
Yeah.
Right.
Different goal.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the sympathetic parasympathetic, because clearly your goals right now are stressing, right? One. And so, the work you're having to do now is different than, if you were in a totally different training cycle, because of the nervous system component. The endocrine issues is related to that. And I think that that's a component that people don't understand well either. They don't understand how to assess their stress levels, and clearly heart rate variability. Like there's other things that people are now learning to do, but I still think that that is one of the biggest neglected pieces of when people feel like they're not getting anywhere with either their strength or their mobility. They're not looking at their stress.
So let me walk through what I go through.
Yeah.
which is going to be overkill. This is not what you need to do, but I'm pushing some limits on some things. And
squatting 1,000 pounds.
Not everybody is stuff
for that. Right. Other people squat 1,000 pounds, maybe not as many times in a week as I do, or a month as I do. Now, so pre-session is really short. Again, it's going to look like a lot of the same stuff I may be doing on an off day, but we already talked about this. Intent, short volume, high intensity, thinking,
get it
got
done.
Like, this is preparation for training. Okay. Post session, I'll do another if time permits, which a lot of times it will because it's a little short. Like immediately after my last squat, I'm laying down behind the squat bar before it's even unloaded, and we're doing some work, similar-ish work, low intensity,
right,
but also short duration, and we're calming. Think about calming. So it's more. I've got grabbing your delt here, just rubbing it, but let's calm. The sooner we can get back into this rest and recovery. I can't hit the tissue aggressively because we just hit it aggressively with some heavy ass squats, right?
So that intent is rest and recovery.
Rest and recovery, yeah. But still not like deep work. But then up to 2 days out from squatting, there may be other sessions that are longer duration, intense, and deep. And that's where we're really trying to open up those other, working through whatever issues I've developed through the week.
Yeah, deal with that buildup of all those things.
And so it's more focused on the type of stuff that a lot of people would be thinking about doing. Hey, I've got this restriction. I've got these issues. I got the sore muscles, whatever it is. All of this really enhances recovery significantly. If I wasn't doing it, I wouldn't be able to pack my training as tight or as much volume in my training as I do with these different approaches. But that's 3 different approaches using almost all the same tools and tools and approaches. Like, hey, I'm hitting the lat, let's say, with a boomstick. But how I'm approaching it is different in every one of those sessions as far as volume, intensity, and duration.
And this is where the conversation needs to go, right? So, this is where people need to get better about their own programming, and if they're working with clients, programming. This idea that all these things are created equal is ridiculous.
Well, let's go somewhere else for a second. And this is the whole other internet argument. Second-year medical student or whoever is position and posture don't matter.
Right.
We'll adapt to any of them.
Of course, yeah.
So they just don't matter. Actually, it goes beyond that. Like I know there's some pretty big names out there that say this. And this is, in fact, true. We adapt. Exactly. Again, said principle, specific adaptation. We'll adapt. If I've got shitty form on deadlift and I continue training on, I'm going to get stronger in that position. Yeah. Now, what is our goal as an athlete? Our goal is to lift the most weight. Okay? So from a training program management standpoint, if I'm in better position and optimizing efficiency and getting the joints in the right position, what that means is I can tolerate more volume, more intensity in the same time period or a smaller time period. Anybody know what happens if I'm able to do more of that in shorter time periods?
Let me see.
Might get stronger.
You get stronger. This is very basic training. So the argument against is correct.
Right.
But the context is taken out of place. This isn't.
They're talking about it's a whole different conversation. Like
I would not, if I was in poor position, if I lost my spinal position, I just posted this week squat failures.
Right.
And because I had a lot of misses this week, and people are like, well, how did you miss? You didn't lose position. Well, I didn't lose position because I don't lose position. If I was losing position, I would not be able to tolerate what I'm doing.
Right.
And I'll drive this point home. I use this kind of storyline approach on the Hybrid podcast with Steph Cohen and Hayden last week. But there's a deadlift called the Jefferson Curl. Not the Jefferson deadlift, that's one that's between your legs. But the Jefferson Curl is a multi-segmented, so imagine curling a weight up with your spine. So starting with the lowest vertebrae and then moving it, and then the next one. So if you do that, you will adapt and you will get stronger. You cannot tolerate, just go try to do a max effort on it. So again, and I'll throw this out there as a challenge to anybody that actually says posture doesn't matter. Go try to get a study approved through a board, and it will get denied for ethical reasons, because if you're maxing out on Jefferson Curls,
right,
somebody's going to get hurt. Right. You're going to be so sore and so destroyed, you cannot tolerate the same amount. If I did a deadlift session, handling more weights with more weights and more volume significantly, I could tenfold it. I'm making up numbers, but pretty sure I could tenfold it as far as volume and still recover to get to the next session, which would allow me to lift more weight.
Right.
So again, it doesn't matter. A Jefferson curl in itself doesn't mean that you're going to get hurt or injured. So the people stating this are right.
Right.
But they have these blinders on to apply some context. Like, the simple fact, it's not arguable. If I lift more in a shorter time period, I will get stronger.
Right. Period.
And if I'm in better positions, I can tolerate those loads better. If my joints are in better positions, I can tolerate this better. Take the freaking blinders off.
Yeah, well,
there's uses for all this stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, bad posture, though, in bad position is going to end up in injury at some point.
No, it will not.
Well, you'll adapt to that location, but a straight
it raises the risk of injury, but it does not guarantee
you can
injury.
get away with it.
Won't guarantee it, but yeah, it's riskier for sure.
And I think that's why people get upset sometimes, because they're like, you can't say for sure you're going to get hurt. We're like, we're not saying.
So I'm not,
sure.
and that's why I said you're wrong, because
what
want,
Rudy's point
I want to say
is a different
point. They're right in
like,
what they're saying, but there's a lot more context to the situation, and when you start looking at overall your life and training program, these things add up. Again, let's look at a larger methodology.
And I think that's our takeaway here. Like, our number one message here is that it's so much more nuanced than people want to realize. Like, it's so much more context driven. These black and white statements that like people argue about, or that they think somebody is holding the viewpoint on. Right? People assume our viewpoint on stuff constantly. It's fascinating. I'm like, when did I ever say any of these things? Right? Like, you've never heard me say these things. But you think I'm arguing
here's the other thing.
I'm not.
I got called out on recently for posting, one of these videos, and it was like, you realize you're completely wrong. This is all structural based stuff, and I'm like, I know. We could talk neurology and pain science and all this, but it's all inputs to the system,
right?
And we get outputs, and we could go into this, but we can't. We don't need to be able to teach in a video that we're posting up to try to help people on a specific platform. Let's say Instagram, because we use that one a 1 minute
video.
It's a 1 minute video. We're not going to do an entire 6-year or 4-year program worth of context around it. And anybody that has that background should understand why we've shortened, abbreviated some of the terminology. Yes, I know we're not actually like breaking up tissue. I know that there's other underlying things, but you know that, I know that.
We can't. At the end of
the day, most people don't know that, and we don't need to go into that. So it's the conversation's abbreviated so we can get that across, because again, this person doesn't need to get a bachelor's in kinesiology or a doctorate in something. They need to be able to know that, this subclavius is affecting my breathing. And
if I want to get here, and I do this for 2 minutes and I get
I'm done,
then
and
who the hell gives a shit about all the rest of the bowl?
Exactly.
It's just like I think we're missing the forest for the trees a lot of times here, where people are arguing in silos over stuff where it's all context based. And it's like anybody who understands this or works with real problems knows that. My one athlete is going to have a completely different context than my other athlete, right? When you had your shoulder surgeries, right? That was a completely different context for what you would need to be doing after that than what you were doing 20 years ago, right? And so you treat it differently. Anybody who doesn't understand that, I don't know how you have a conversation.
Well, let's talk silos for a minute, because this is
let's talk silos.
So everybody thinks about silos in like the strength and conditioning and rehab world as being the difference between the strength coach and the therapist and all these different educational and or practice based. There's more silos within a practice than without.
You bet.
Like,
and the arguments are fascinating.
Exactly, and
like,
a lot of them are the we're kind of touching base on here, but it's like we've got the people that there's not going to be any manual therapy.
Oh yeah,
right. Everything.
Don't bother touching it. Only load it.
Only load it, or we need the correctives only approach. We're gonna push people away from load. Because
they're not allowed to pick up anything more than 5 pounds.
Movement, and it's got to be ultra coached and perfect. And so anyway, look beyond the silos from we got kind of some of them right here, but the bigger silos are inter-practice, not between the
we
practices.
Share more between than I think think people realize.
Yeah.
And I also think that really goes to a point, which is the human body is capable of so much variety in terms of what it can do, what it responds to, right? And so the argument that, I'm only going to fix this problem with load and I'm not going to let you touch like this or put a tool on this because I can fix it with load is just as silly as saying, I'm only going to use a foam roller on it and I'm never going to introduce load. It's like they're tools. You can use 1,000 tools and you can get to similar end results. And we can argue about for an individual which one's more applicable at that moment, but to disavow or say that entire classes of options are just wasted time is really just dumb. You're limiting yourself. You're limiting your own options. Because then, yes, maybe I can fix that with only load, right? Cool. But guess what? If in 5 minutes I can improve your positioning and then load you, why wouldn't I do that? It just makes sense to me,
So we used the term maximizing earlier, and I'm wondering if a better term, because we're talking about maximizing strength, maximizing range of motion, maximizing recovery, maximizing or defining position to the nth degree, but would a better term be optimizing, because it's a combination of all of those that you're really searching for.
And it's based off of who are you talking about? Right? Because optimizing for a powerlifter is completely different than optimizing for a yogi, which is completely different than a gymnast, which is completely different than a runner, which goes back to the beginning of our conversation, which is why? What the hell are you trying to do? When we program for runners, guess what? We look at the problems differently. We go, okay, well, what kind of repetitive load are you dealing with? You're dealing with trunk rotation. You're dealing with a lot of, extension, glutes, hamstring, shock absorption, and these things. And it has to work rhythmically for thousands of repetitions. Guess what? How we're going to approach that systematically is going to be different than how I'm going to approach somebody who's going to do a 3-rep deadlift that day. Right? What are the problems that we see in deadlift? Well, you're going to maintain the activation of the foot, make sure the tibial rotation, all those things are happening. Well, with runners, we need to make sure that this whole liquid sequence is tying itself together rhythmically. So we'll approach it differently. We'll look at the hip flexors differently. It might be the same technique that we're teaching, but the intention is different. The volume is different. The why is different. And that, yet again, I think is our number one driving message of this whole podcast, which is you gotta go deeper. Look at the why. Think through the problems.
Well,
don't just get blanket about this stuff.
Another one from my own, which we were talking a little bit about before this podcast. Again, this isn't not what I'm recommending or anything like that, but to give some perspective, to guide the deeper soft tissue work that we do during the week. We actually, put a laser on my. Sounds fancy, but it's with a phone and a little holder type piece, and some marks on the floor. But look at pelvis orientation, pelvis rotation, spine rotation, thoracic, shoulders. We look at all this, and then that drives. Oh, I see that the pelvis is pulled and shifted this way. We need to work on the quads on this side because it's pulling it the other way. We need to work on the glute and psoas on this side. But that drives, and then we retest it when we're done. Go, we're back in what is your normal range, and that's what our goal is.
Test.
and
And
retest,
retest.
right? So
Move.
not everybody's
You
going to
know?
go do that, and that's not what I'm recommending.
No, the
but
level
it's-
of depth of
it's-
that is not
it's showing
necessary
like
for everybody.
but there's a specific goal, and we look at this, and that drives it. It's not just random.
Exactly.
Let's go do this.
And what planes are you moving?
And the reason we do this is because every week I'm pushing that limit. We don't have time for a couple weeks,
Right.
Because I've got a big session coming up with massive volumes and loads in a couple days, and so we don't have time to do. So we use some tools to speed up that assessment process to drive what we're doing with the soft tissue. You don't need that. Sure makes it the
You
process
can get
a
it
little
in
easier.
a more bastardized
Yep.
way,
Yep.
and or when we teach level 1 course, that we're teaching like 10 assessments. They can be done in less than 2 minutes, right? Why? Those are not clinical level assessments. That's not what I would do with a patient.
Yep.
It's just a lens, and that's the other thing you have to understand about assessments. They're all just lenses. Every single thing we choose to look at, by nature of looking at that, you are also not looking at other things. And we've determined, that certain things are worth looking at, because repeatedly over time, when we work tibial rotation, we see an immediate improvement in outcome, right? And so you go, okay, that lists high on priority, for this goal. And that, I think, is the key, is that, powerlifting, you're moving in very specific planes. And the goal is to really be able to maximize that load in a specific plane. If you're a gymnast, well, your planes you're moving through, are going to be vastly different, And so then what you're trying to use Rudy's word, like optimize for, would also be different. If you're Olympic lifting, it'd be different, right? And I think that's the key. Your assessments should be based off of your end goal as well. Because I can assess 1,000 things. Half of it doesn't even matter in terms of real-time results to change something, and that's what we talk about in the level 1 course, right? What you're trying to find is the 1 to 2 things. You're going to find 100 things, and I think people get lost in the weeds because they find all these things wrong and they think they have to fix them all.
No, yeah.
You don't have to fix them all.
No, you shouldn't.
And as a matter of fact, you're going to mess yourself up
exactly.
real quick
The
if you
fix-
start treating problems that are not
Not the real
not
problem.
the real problem, right? And
Take-
misattributing cause,
Take your top couple hitters and fix them.
right? And a
Then-
lot of other stuff
And now
will fix itself.
they will.
Yeah,
And then now move to your next issues.
right. And I think that's kind of like what's being missed. And I get it, because it seems more intimidating. It seems more complex. And I think like what both of our goals are is to make the complex more understandable, more accessible. And so yes, we're talking about all this individualization and variation, but guess what? There's some basic rules that it keeps coming back to. If you're putting load on yourself, well, breathing and bracing matters. Check that. Your feet matter. Check that. Those are fundamental things that, yes, you might have a very unique hip twist thing, right? But just start with that, and then move from there. You don't have to fix everything.
No.
As a matter of fact, you can't. There's always going to be some
There's
asymmetry.
always something.
There's
for
always
sure.
something, right? And if there isn't, you're going to create something, And then the other thing is, and I think this is the other topic, is that right now, I think, for a long time, I think a lot of people were talking about the fact that, they were trying to really prescribe that this is the one and only way to squat, or this is the one, and that was like this whole other complete misunderstanding. And I think that's what screwed up a lot of the conversation, is that people were saying, well, you're assessing for what? To put the feet on rails and make them do this in their squat? It's like, no. Asymmetry is part of the deal. Your hip alignment is different than yours, which is okay. What we're trying to find is with your anatomical setup.
What's the
stuff everybody-
optimum
What's
position?
What's the optimum position, right? And that's different for different people, and that's good, right?
Yeah.
And
But they're
that's
still the
thing.
same principles.
But the same principle.
We still, goal number 1, be able to breathe and control our spinal mechanics.
Before anything
Right.
else. Right?
Be
'Cause if
able
you can't do that.
Be able to root and have a great foundation to the ground that's also going to control the upstream joints and provide a good input to the hips, and now generate power through that big driver,
Exactly.
the hips. And those principles need to stay the same because they don't change.
Because they're
And honestly,
fundamental to
A lot of those
this human
base
body.
principles actually play a role across. You mentioned a lot of other stuff. That's human movement. they're going to be looked at a little differently in each of those areas.
Or sequenced
Yep,
differently.
sequence
right?
differently.
Like
Yep.
the order in which you do a motion,
Yep.
like a pitcher or something,
yeah.
right? Well, what matters for that is going to be different because their wind up in torque, is
Yep.
going to require different levers. But you're still going to have to go through foot, brace. It's
Yep.
just like you guys say,
And
you're
then-
not dialing
and
it
then-
up to
and,
10.
And then those two power
you know?
generations, the shoulder complex and the hip complex.
And then
Yep.
the sequence is very different because your goal is different. If I'm a boxer, my goal is different. If I'm a runner, my goal is different. I don't think we can pound this message enough. Figure out what the hell you're trying to do first and then work backwards. If I'm trying to rehab a medial, elbow tendonitis, well, that's a specific goal, which is different than if I'm trying to max out my overhead press or whatever it is. Define your goal.
Yeah.
Work backwards.
You ever hear of any other social media gaffes you want to address? I was going to ask him
God,
another
yeah, I
question.
know.
I was going to switch things. I was going to switch the
Well,
topic a little bit.
I think we've dove
we've
deep enough
hit that.
into
We've
this.
hit that pretty good. We were thinking about talking about entrepreneurship since Acumobility and Kabuki Strength were founded within like.
I was
month
just,
of
it
each
was
other.
just, you're taking the
Like-
words right about it. I was going to say, we've grown up together. What year did you found your company?
Oh, the same.
So
Literally, it was
2015.
within a month.
Yeah,
of when you guys
2015, and
launched.
we've grown together. And we were talking about the why, and we've focused on Kabuki is focused on our why. We've determined that our why is to make the world a better place through strength. And everything that we do, whether it's on the education or the equipment side, we always come back to that. That's what we've focused on. But what's your why, Brad? And how did you start? And why did you start Acumobility? And what's it all about?
I mean, we built Acumobility out of our sports medicine clinic, right? So we were working on these problems. We always considered ourselves an education company first, right? And then my wife, Dr. Sonia Pasquale, she has these brilliant ideas for products all of the time. And we realized that, man, we can really innovate and create better tools for this, But our why has been true for the last, since we started the clinic 10 years ago, which is to help individuals and empower individuals to learn how to maximize and optimize their movement, move better, live better, and take control of their health and their life. And then we just, we tailor that message to whether it's a practitioner, we teach them a little differently, than the individual, or a coach, right? But the same driving force is to empower people, give them the tools, give them the strategies that make it faster, more accessible, and easier to take charge of their own health, to be able to do the things they love, for as long as humanly possible, is a driving force of us. And I think that's why from the get-go, we were very philosophically aligned. And we sat down that first time and it was like, very similar root goals in terms of empowerment, in terms of really trying to both create tools and education. to help
Education
people.
being the real driver.
It's
because
the
it
number
just,
one thing. The tools are secondary.
Right.
I remember because we met like within just over a year of us starting, and it was probably just under a year of you starting. It was at the Arnold.
Yep.
The following year in 2016,
Which was insane.
and we had a mutual friend. I think he was there, maybe
Jeff
helping
Bromhall.
you. Yeah, and
who works at RPR now.
Yeah.
As their
Yeah, he
chief
does.
operating
Yep.
officer. Yeah.
And Jeff's like, I really want you to meet, this company that's making these really cool
And you're
mobility
like,
products.
yeah.
And that's
Like-
pretty much that's
yeah.
exactly what was going on.
That's what
Oh,
people
yeah.
want to be.
And I kept putting it off. I put it off until I'm like, fine, I'm gonna go down there and meet him. And then I talked to you and Sonia, and instantly I'm like, all right.
We're like, oh, wait a minute. Like, we actually think alike here. There's something to this.
But
And then I think it flew out like 3 months later.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we shot some of that initial
Yeah.
stuff and it just started talking deeper. And it was so funny because from the entrepreneur standpoint, like we were both completely young companies with no reason that we should have succeeded to this point. That was 4 years ago, which is mind blowing to me. I literally feel like it was yesterday sometimes. And also like it was 30 years. Like time has just lost all meaning in
Yeah.
terms of like this journey. And
But
to
as
see
an
both of us go
entrepreneur,
through
though, it wasn't. You didn't start off saying, "How am I going to make money?"
Well,
You start off saying, "How am I going to help empower people?" And that
exactly.
all follows. And that's kind
So
of the
this
same
is-
thing we've done.
yeah,
Because if we want to make money, well, this was the wrong way to just start. Like entrepreneurship is a journey of hardship and constant innovation and problems and all these things that from the outside people don't realize. To even exist as a company, the trial by fire you have to go through is impossible to know in advance. We were so naive, when we first launched. And because we believed in ourselves, we believed in our mission. We were like, no, we're going to go help people. We've got these great ideas, right? We're going to build these products and all this education. And we just assumed it was going to work. Well, looking backwards, you go, well, that was not a foregone conclusion, at all. Look at all the stuff that we had to overcome every week. And people assume, oh, you get more successful. It gets easier. It doesn't get easier. It's bigger problems, new problems.
Bigger problems, bigger numbers.
Everything, it just grows with you. And I don't think people realize that. They look from the outside, the whole overnight success thing. Or the reality of what it means to be in the trenches is a completely different animal. And we've watched each other go through it.
And I think there's a big misconception out there that people think that a successful business, grows up because it has this amazing product or idea or this amazing business process. And that's that's the cornerstone of what makes it happen.
If only I have that.
And there's so many incredible ideas out there, but it takes way more than that. People approach me all the time with those, and I never see them go anywhere, or they start and fizzle and disappear because it takes more. It takes a lot of that underlying stuff that you're talking about. It's not just this amazing idea, and it's just everybody's going to throw their money at you, and it's just going to the world's going to come to you. And
if they do throw their money at you, what the hell are you going to do? Now you got to go scale and make this thing, and people fail at so many levels of this because the reality of what it means to build is just completely different than the myth of it or the fantasy of it, And I think that, I try to be honest with people when they talk about, I want to go start my company.
I love your, what do you tell people, Brad? Hey, Brad, you
got a good idea?
I got a good idea. I want to start a company. What advice do you give me, Brad?
Don't do it, is the very first thing I say. And you want to know why? Because if that is enough to dissuade somebody from doing it, they should not do it. But if they turn around to me and they're like, no, man, this is why. I was like, okay, now let's talk, right? Maybe you should, maybe you should really pursue
I love that though. Your first one, just to tell them.
It's like, no,
don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Just don't do it.
If they can't handle that, yeah, that's right.
I mean, if you can't handle
if you can't handle that,
who doesn't even know your business telling you not to do it, well, you really should not do it. That's just
and if you quit, you have no chance for success.
There's no chance, right? And so, if you go deeper than that, then I start talking to people about the reality of just you got to really know your why, which goes back to what we're doing.
Exactly.
Because if you don't, and you're starting it just for money,
we talked about that. We've talked about the book by Simon Sinek. It starts with why.
Why.
And that's a great reference book.
It's more than just for you, for the motivation and the perseverance. Your why is why your customers connect to you. It's why your employees become engaged with your purpose, and
they share your passion.
And everything happens through our relationships and the people. It's not this business process. It's not this product idea. It's not, none of those things are it.
Your why is why you show up when it's hard too, right? It's easy to show up when everything's great. It's easy to show up when, you're just killing it with sales and, oh, your ad thing did really good. And, oh, you just made this and this connection or, whatever team just put your stuff, right? It's easy to show up to work that day. It's hard when you're like, the factory's behind. We're closing down.
Payrolls tomorrow. I don't have the money.
That's hard. Such and such thing just happened. There was, the electricity went out. Whatever it was. I remember getting a call, from our manufacturer, and they had a problem, and we're just like, oh crap. This is our problem now. And it's those are the days when you have to actually put on your why and go, why the hell am I showing up here every day? It sure as hell ain't for the money, because if that's your why, then you should just go into something different, right? If your why is just to make money, there's a lot of ways to make money that are actually easier. They really are.
A lot less risky.
And a lot less risky. Yeah. It's go leverage everything you have, put it into something with no reason that it should succeed except you believe it should, and then every year keep trying to grow that.
Yep.
That's insanity. I mean, only insane people do this. Like,
Boy, are we crazy.
I think there's something wrong with us. Like,
I know there is. But
I know there is.
that's why we're good friends.
That's what we saw. Insanity in each other's eyes. that
was the ticket.
You're crazy too.
Yes.
Like, I'll be damned.
I can connect with this.
I like this craziness. But I think that's a good point. You know? And I don't think it gets talked about enough. I think, we're living in a day and age. We talked about this last time I was up here, right? Where there's like almost, a lot of encouragement for the idea of entrepreneurship. We're living in the gig economy. We're living in all these things, right? You're your own brand. Everybody's their own brand. We don't talk a lot about the downsides of that. You don't talk about all the companies that fail. You don't talk about all the people who go broke doing it. You don't talk about the not successes, and you don't talk about the years of
people
struggle.
that bust their ass on their side gig for 15
A decade.
years.
Yeah, 15 years.
And they've wasted their time with their family, their friends,
And
or
they
whatever,
never get
and
it
it
back.
never gets anywhere.
Right. And that's the
there's-
thing. There's nobody guarantees
So
you
you
success.
better have a why if you're going to do that, right?
Yeah. It's a risk. It's definitely a risk.
And it's not a risk that ever goes away. That's the other thing. I don't care how big you are.
No.
I don't care
Well,
if you're Apple. I don't care if you're Amazon.
Look at the big
you're-
companies that
they go back.
the typewriter industry is
Just
great
went
for
away.
this. Just completely gone. Like some of these massive recognized brands that thought that
Blockbuster.
they're
Blockbuster. In a year, like
just
Whoops.
gone.
Guess we should have paid attention to that thing called Netflix.
I love their internal memo about it.
Well, it's not like should have paid attention to Netflix, but it's like constantly be looking at the market and the changes and anticipating what things are going and then tying that back to your why. Hey, things are going good. We're making money.
Great. Let's put our head in the sand and just not look at the rest of the world.
And that's exactly what happened to the typewriter industry, because that one everybody saw coming
for a while.
The current technology, like the change with Blockbuster and Netflix, that did come pretty fast.
Yeah.
But
And that
they
was shocking
still,
to
you
them.
look at some of those bigger, slower changes, and how could you not see it? And people didn't make changes. We're the best. We know what's right.
Like we're the top dog.
Yep.
Blockbuster's internal memos were
You get-
fascinating, right?
I've never heard
They had somebody do an audit, right? Essentially, this came out afterwards, right? And they looked at this Netflix thing coming up, and the presentation to the board was, well, here's why we don't have to be worried about this. People like going to the stores and meeting their neighbors there and perusing through stuff, and being able to turn the cases over. Right? That was their argument for not competing. Wow. What they didn't realize is that nobody likes going to stores. People want to sit on their
Not
couch
if there's a
and
more
not see their
convenient way to
neighbors
do it. People
and
love.
not,
People really love convenience.
People more than anything.
Anything.
Right? Like if the modern economy hasn't proved that.
They like to turn the cases around. That's beautiful.
Isn't it like go through the shelves, you're like, wow, you missed it.
But
you missed it.
the one resource that's limited for everybody is time, and that is exactly the issue that they had. They figured that everyone has time to go to the store. They don't.
Right. Not anymore.
Yeah. So.
Well, we're getting close to wrapping up time.
So I appreciate you coming back out again, but just quickly, what are you guys planning to work on together? You gonna do some content with us? The two of you,
yeah. Ton of filming tomorrow.
You got it all lined up.
Oh yeah. Well, Chris.
Well, you'll probably make stuff up as you go along.
I don't think we've ever planned anything once. No. Generally, we just turn a camera on.
Except for nap time.
We plan nap time. There's
but,
scheduled naps. Everything else is just what do you want to work on? You want to film this? Right?
Yeah.
Let's go do that thing.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with. It'll be fun.
Well, thanks for having me out here. I love getting out here. This is fun, and I really came for that massage chair.
Isn't that fun?
That was the only reason I came.
Well, Brad, where can people find more about you or the company? Whatever you. I know you're taking a little back seat on some stuff, but Acumobility, I guess, is the bigger thing. Where can people learn more?
You mean more than the clinic? In terms of Acumobility, you can find it at acumobility.com. You can find our stuff on Kabuki, and then our Instagram is Acumobility, Facebook is Acumobility. We put up amazing daily education
That's with one
content.
C. to be.
1C. Yep.
Yes, everybody puts 2 C's in
It took me
right?
forever. I kept having to correct myself. over and over again.
Acumobility is spelled with 1C, right?
You're saving time.
My wife, Dr. Sunny Pasquale, she puts up amazing educational content every day on Instagram, right? So it's all free. So if you want some great access to videos of stuff that we're talking about, well, go check that out because it's all
And
a lot of it's
anybody that's in the Boston, Wakefield area,
You can come by our clinic. We are just north of Boston, maybe about 15 minutes, and we specialize in movement. We specialize in strength athletes, endurance athletes. We specialize in rebuilding dysfunctional movement. We specialize in orthopedics. All of that done under one roof, combining acupuncture, chiropractic, movement, massage, like all of it's done. And that's Acumobility Wellness.
Great. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, guys.